In this section, we're going to write some actual end-to-end tests. But before we write our end-to-end tests, we have to decide what exactly we're going to test. So let's look at some possible scenarios that we can do with this application that we might want to write tests about. One of the things that our application does is by default, it goes to the route events. So even if I take this and cut it off, it's still going to go back to the route events. So a very simple first test would be to test the default route. So let's go to our scenarios file and we'll write that first test. So in order to test this, I need to navigate to the root URL. I do that by calling the browser function. The browser function is one of the special global functions that's available in end-to-end tests. The browser function has a navigate to function that I'm going to call, and I'm just going to pass in a /. That will send me to the root of the website. Now I can expect that the path is actually going to be events, and I do that by using the expect function, and then I ask the browser for its current URL. And now that my test is written, we're going to run that in Karma and see if that passes. Okay, so our test is run and it's passing. Let's verify that that's correct by just checking that if we pass in something else, it fails. Okay, it was expecting the path to be events too, but it wasn't, it was events. So let's fix that and bring our test back to green. All right. Now let's look at another scenario we might test. I want to test this events page. So I just want to check a couple of things on this page. I want to check that events is the title, and I want to check that Angular Code Camp is the very first event that I see. So let's go back to our test and we'll write a new one. This time I'm going to add a describe because I'm on the events page. In this describe, I'm going to add a before each where I'm going to navigate to the events page. The benefit of going to the page that I'm going to be testing in my before each is that now inside the tests, I can just always know that I'm on the events page. So let's write the test that checks that we should render the correct HTML when the user navigates to events. So the first thing I wanted to check is that events is the title of the page. Now if I go into the partial for that page, which is under app, partials, and it's the event list partial, I can look and see that events is an H1 tag. So going back to my scenarios, I'm going to expect that the first H1 that I see has the text of events. Now here I'm calling the element function. This is very similar to the jQuery function. I can pass in a jQuery selector and it will find that element for me. So I'm getting the first H1 and I'm just going to grab its text. To do that, I call the text function. Now I'm going to use the toMatch function because I want to pass in a regular expression. This is a lot safer than actually checking toB because getting the text of a set of HTML DOM nodes might actually give you a lot of stuff that you weren't expecting to get. Another way that you can do that instead of using toMatch and a regular expression is to use the toContains function. The other thing I said I wanted to check was that the Angular Code Camp was the very first session that we saw. Now in the event list partial, because I'm using a directive, I actually don't get to see what the HTML inside of this is. So I'm going to look inside that directive so that I can see what the HTML is. And here I see that the name of the event is an H2 tag. So I'm going to go back to my scenario and I'm going to write an expectation that the very first H2 that I see has the text Angular Code Camp in it. All right, now that I've saved that test, let's go and run it and see what we get. Okay, so we've run 2 tests and both of them are passing. So let's move on from testing the event list page and let's test some parts of the event details page. So let's go into our first event and let's look at some of the things we might want to test within it. So looking at this page, I can see that by default my sessions are sorted by name. So we can test that the sessions are sorted by name by checking that the very first session is this session. If I sort them by vote, it becomes a different session. So let's test that we're sorting them by name by checking that How to Be Awesome is the very first session. So again, I'm going to use a before each function to navigate to that event. Again, using the browser.navigate_to function is how I tell the browser to go to a particular page. So before I write this test, I just want to take a minute and talk to you about the functions that we've been using, the browser function and the expect function. These functions are documented on the Angular website. Let's go there real quick and look at the documentation. So I go to the Angular site And I'm going to go to the developer guide. And I'm going to click on E2E testing. There's a bit of an overview given, and then down here it gives you the API. This is a list of the functions that you can use inside of an end-to-end test. You can see that browser has a lot of functions. There's also expect, and there's several others. We're going to use a few of these, but we're not going to use all of them. If you have any questions about the API that you can use inside of an end-to-end test, this is where you can get more information about the functions available. Unfortunately, at this time, the documentation for all these functions could be a lot more complete. Hopefully that'll be improved in the future, and at least for now there's a list of the functions and some basic information about them. Now we're writing a test that the sessions are sorted by name. So in order to know what element to select, I need to know what the HTML looks like. So let's look at the event directive and look at the sessions, and we can see that the sessions are a directive session thumbnail. So we'll look inside the session thumbnail directive, and I can see that the name of the session is the h4 tag. So going back to my scenario, I want to write an expectation that the first h4 tag that I see that has that well title class has the name How to Be Awesome. Let's run that test now. Okay, that test is passing also. Now let's consider what our next scenario should be. Another thing that would be useful to test is how many sessions show up for this event. This event has 5 sessions. So let's write a test that checks that this event has 5 sessions. This allows us to show another function that's available inside of end-to-end testing, and that is the repeater function. So let's go back to the partial for the event details page and see what the HTML looks like. Looking in here, I can see that this unordered list has a class of thumbnails, and then it's got an li that repeats for every event session. So in order to ask an end-to-end test to count those up, I can use a selector that looks for the thumbnails class and looks for li's within that. And then I can call the count function, and that will count up the list items. And I'm testing that equals 5. Let's run that test as well.